recording.
Ooh, I got a little flutter of nerves.
You bringing us in hot for 23?
I guess, yeah. Hey folks, welcome to 2023. This is fucking great, isn't it?
You're joined by your four hosts this week.
Four
hosts.
Four hosts.
Me, Mark, Siobhan Wilson,
Hello.
and McTavish. Where is he?
He's mooching about in the kitchen. Seems to be having a good time.
We'll try and get a word in from him later on.
Hopefully, yeah. But yeah, welcome to Happy New Year, I guess. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year, Siobhan.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How was your Christmas period, folks?
I hate that question.
I know.
Fucking hell.
Everyone in my family got norovirus except for me. So on Christmas Day,
Isn't it embarrassing when you get the same present for folk?
all the presents were left wrapped under the tree for like an entire day late. And I was just watching TV on my own, like at least it's quiet.
Is there not a rule that the later you open your presents, the more posh you are, the most...
That was what Danny was saying when we were out last week for that thing with my book club. I suppose they are now. Yeah, because like I spent Christmas at Danny's at my partner's, and they opened their presents at midnight, which I'd never done
on Christmas Eve.
On Christmas,
it's a Northern European thing, isn't it?
No, on Christmas Day, midnight Christmas Day.
You mean midnight as in like Christmas Eve into Christmas Day?
Yeah,
right, okay.
Yeah,
I don't call it midnight and Christmas Day, I call it midnight and Christmas Eve, but anyway.
It's a new day though.
We're already veering wildly off piste.
Anyway, yeah, but so this year I spent it with the actual Christmas Day with my dad and my stepsister and her newborn and my stepbrother-in-law's family, I guess. And like for the first time fucking ever, man, like they didn't open presents until after dinner, like 8 o'clock, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Like my family have never done this before.
No, that's weird.
What's happening?
That is weird.
That was deeply strange.
It's like a European thing that they open at midnight on Christmas Eve. I understand we always opened on Christmas Day, or you would get blackmailed to go to midnight mass or whatever, and you could open one after that.
I totally remember that from growing up.
Siobhan's being a pistol to the head signal. Siobhan, what's your family tradition?
Yeah, the same as you. The kind of like the making excuses to avoid Christmas mass, and then opening one present at Christmas Eve, and then the rest of the presents in the morning. I don't know how posh that makes us on the scale of posh.
Let's work that out.
Yeah, let's ask the listeners to tell us.
So, if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you've probably heard us mention and play the music of Siobhan Wilson a number of times. She's finally here to join us in person.
The body as a battleground where no one gets to wear the crown. Unload the gun, don't go shooting where you don't know. She held the bullet and murderous thoughts. You're stuck in the break of a wave. You're haunted by a line from a song. You're beaten by the weight of a prayer. Try to move on.
Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
You drove like 400 hours to get here today with your very patient little dog. But before we get into that, Mark, 2023 admin, I'm sure we've already got some.
Yeah, so the record club's awesome. We've actually got somebody on the show today who's actually in the fucking record club, which is great.
Exactly.
Right? So this is the first time it's ever happened, so thanks again, Siobhan. And if you want to hear the record we've got for her and loads of other fucking great ones, go to patreon.com/unsungpod, where you can sign up to our digital or analog record clubs for £15 for digital. 34.
That was a dog related, by the way, and rather than a sound of disappointment.
34 of your currency, plus postage for the analog tier, where you get a different record from the digital one every month, which is cool. And
yeah, so just to summarise that, because Mark's very much a dog person, so he's liable to lose his train of thought a few times here. If you subscribe to the Digital Record Club, we curate and buy records from independent labels and artists such as Siobhan, and we send them to you based on your preferred host or category. If you subscribe to the Analog Record Club, then we send you an LP, like a proper good vinyl, quite often limited edition, and also digital stuff, and they won't be the same thing. So you get quite a lot for that, and that spans the world. You know, the postage will be higher if you're in the likes of North America and stuff. So, you know, we understand if you think that's a bit steep, but if you live in the UK, you get no excuse, because, you know, you're paying for a vinyl and a cool album, and vast majority of it goes to the artists. And as I'm sure Siobhan will illustrate in great detail, the financial returns you get from things like streaming services and stuff are absolutely appalling. So the way we're doing it means you're getting an awful lot more money per record to the artists, and it also helps keep us going as well, because this takes quite a bit of work.
And if perhaps you can't afford those options, and that's fair, we've also got our bonus, our kind of regular £4 a month. Buy us a pint, half a pint, I guess.
Yeah, mate, £4 for a pint. Yeah,
where are you buying pints?
Those days are fading.
Yeah, a coffee maybe.
Starbar.
Yeah. The lunch in there is £4. So
£4 for a 3-course meal just across the river in Glasgow.
From my house, right across from my house.
Has that gone up in price?
Yeah, it's £4.
Gone up a quid.
When I was waiting for the bus to get here today, I was looking right at the Starbar because it's right next to my house, and I was like, it's fucking £4 now. Like, inflation, mate. That's mental.
What are they doing with that money? It's because they've added a garnish.
The price of taxes went up, mate. So yes, so that gets that out of the way. So I see you've got a dog in your lap, Chris.
I have got a dog in my lap. That's literally the first time that's ever happened in this podcast.
That is, it's true.
But it's working for me. So yeah, I do hope he vocalises at some point. Does McTavish like to get involved?
Yeah, if anyone hears any like sniffing or little scraping noises,
could be Weaver.
Could be Weaver.
Could be Weaver.
Weaver's soul whispering. No, it's my dog McTavish. He's a Jack Russell cross, and he's very small, and he's just jumping onto everyone's laps right now.
Yeah, but no, he's in good form.
Yeah, he's fucking adorable, man.
Yeah, so in terms of this podcast, the first show of 2023, we wanted to do something a bit different. And as we said, Siobhan's part of the record club, but Siobhan is an awful lot more than that. I've got a wee list here, Siobhan. Singer, cellist, pianist, guitarist, scorer, composer, label owner, campaigner, activist. They're similar but not quite the same. Sound engineer, party organiser, dog mama. Have I missed much?
All I heard was awful. I've got selective hearing. Siobhan is awful.
So you're going to have to just bear with me here, because I'm going to talk about you as though you're not in the room. One of the things I've always found most fascinating about your career is that you have taken what's almost typically associated with punk rock bands in terms of an approach to releasing and just your aesthetic. It's very much typical of like that DIY punk ethos, but the music you play is very much not typical with what most people would associate with that style of self-releasing and small label ownership and stuff. So we're going to dig into a whole world of that stuff, because I know for a fact you've got loads of things to contribute on a variety of subjects. Obviously this show was set up, it's all about trying to platform unsung heroes and unsung albums and unsung works of the music industry. I'm not saying you're unsung, but the way you've chosen to do it is kind of involved turning your back a bit on some of the more conventional avenues that you could have, I'm sure, quite easily have pursued. So that's going to be interesting to hear about your take on that. Before we get to all that stuff, though, we need to just do a little bit of due diligence and find out where you came from and how you get started in all of this. As I understand it, you grew up in Elgin?
Yes, I grew up in Elgin and Murrayshire.
That's in the north, but was it northeast? Is it northeast or just north?
Yeah, Murrayshire's in the northeast, between Inverness and Aberdeen. I went to Elgin Academy. I had a cello teacher called Mr. Mustard.
Oh, nice.
Oh, really?
And a really
mean?
cool. He was actually lovely. And that was where my childhood was, in Elgin. And then I was in bands. I was in a band called Lost.
Mm-hmm.
We used to
was Weaver in that?
System of a Down covers.
He was Weaver in that?
Was Weaver in that band? Yeah.
He probably could have been if he lived like 30 miles east.
Yeah, like not that far over. Yeah. Wow, there were multiple System of a Down cover bands in that area of Scotland.
New metal was a big thing, man.
But we did some other stuff like American Hi-Fi.
Yeah.
Still
Flavour of the week.
When you say it's another perfect day.
Were you singing?
I sang that one, yeah. And I played bass.
Oh, right, okay.
It was mostly my friend Chris that did all the singing, but
I didn't
he
put bassist in
shy
my list.
away from
Did you grow up in a really musical household?
No, not at all. No, yeah, there was, my dad had a guitar and he played a few chords sometimes. And my parents loved music, but I was just this kind of out of nowhere, like, that was my passion. I did music all the time. Completely obsessed, actually. That's all I really did. And that's the same today.
Yeah.
So.
What did you grow up listening to? What sort of stuff was on in your house?
Anything from Led Zeppelin to Maxime Le Forestier.
Et sur la colline, dans les sauvagines, tu te coucheras. Dans mes bras, ma brune, éclairée de lune, tu te donneras.
To Sandy Denny, like all folk and rock. And then it was like the start of Napster. So we unfortunately participated in a lot of free downloads when I was about 10.
You weren't sued by Lars Ulrich, no.
Do you remember the little player Winamp?
Yeah, I loved Winamp. It was brilliant.
I had Winamp, and I used to hide them in a folder, all the songs from my dad, because he was like, don't download music, it's against the law, and I'm the one who'll go down for it. And so we'd hide them in a little folder and we'd give it an ambiguous name, or like a sort of normal, like kind of office name, like package or package contents, and there'd be like thousands of songs in it. And although that's terrible, and it's like formed that fact of like music being free now largely, is like informed a lot of the practices of my life, career, and like the way I make music. At the time, it opened up this world and this library that was at my fingertips, so like I could educate myself on music in a way that wouldn't have been possible. I was
kind of, that's the same as kind of what happened to me getting into music. Like we've done episodes on cover mounts, right, and it's obviously a big thing for some people involved in this podcast, but it totally wasn't for me.
CDs and tapes in the fronts of magazines.
Doing that, what you did is reading about stuff and crying, for example, and then going in half a day downloading one song because our internet connection was
overnight
so
to download a single.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is the only song by that band that I love, and I now love that band.
Yeah,
you know, that's how I got into AFI and stuff like that. I was like, oh, I've got one fucking AFI song. Yes, I love that band.
Weaver's spoken about that a lot as well, because I mean, Weaver comes from north of Scotland as well, and he had that issue where there was only so much in the local HMV, and so his musical tastes early on were limited by what was in the local record store. And in these kind of like, it's not exactly rural, but in those more kind of parochial wee places, it's harder to get a diversity of music. And then he spoke about, you do in hindsight feel bad for that revolution that devalued music, but also Napster and online sharing and things just absolutely blew open the gates of what he could listen to, and therefore what music he could make and get into. Yeah,
definitely. We had an LP player in the house to listen to Led Zeppelin and things on, like my dad's record collection, but we didn't have a HMV because Elgin's like too small.
Elgin's the only place that I've ever been where the town centre closed at night. They used to pull a gate across that you couldn't drive through anymore, and you'd have to go the long way around.
Well, I only started driving like this year, so I wouldn't have noticed. But yeah, we had a venue called The Loft in Kinloss.
That's right, I remember that
and
place.
That's where Biffy Clyro came. So I was a big Biffy Clyro fan back when they did 57 and 27
and Just Boy and all that kind of stuff.
And they came to play, and that was like one of my first gigs, if not the first sort of proper gig that I saw. So a lot of music came to us. We had a tiny music shop called Sound and Vision, where we would just go and like we wouldn't buy anything, or I don't even know if we listened to much music. We would just kind of loiter, and that was like the safe place for moshers to go to not get beaten up.
But here it was a gallery of modern art, where we used to all go.
That's so good. See,
were you one of those goths that sat in the steps outside?
I was I used to go to the Cat House Unders and stuff. So.
Did you have one of those long sleeved net mesh tops?
Yes.
I did, yes.
Yes.
Of course I did. I was at the EFI, mate.
Oh my goodness. That is special. I've never really pictured you like that, but it's no going back.
You don't want to. If you look at my Facebook, you might be able to find a photograph.
So Siobhan, so you're saying that your family weren't, I mean, they liked music, but they weren't massively musical. You're a trained cellist, aren't you?
Yes.
I know you've got a master's now in composition. Is that right?
Yes.
Single word answers. I'm going to pitch these at you like this.
Correct.
Are you also were you trained in singing and piano, or was that self-taught? And what about like guitar? Because you do a lot of guitar now. Is that self-taught?
From the age of 7, there was a upright piano in the house. My granny moved into like an assisted housing. Mm-hmm. She had an upright piano that she'd had since she was a kid. And so it was given to us, and I played it. And after like 5 minutes, I was just like, wow, what is this amazing machine? I totally remember that feeling of just like, this is it. Mm-hmm. Everything before that moment, life before I've crossed this line, and then like life afterwards. And that was like a definitive moment of any instrument that came my way. Like the neighbour played the cello, and I heard it, and I was like, I have to get really good at the cello. Where can I find one?
Such a beautiful sounding instrument. It's really enchanting, isn't it? There's
something, I remember the first time I heard the cello as well, just this like deep, gravelly tone that's so similar to a human voice. Mm-hmm. And it's just like emotional in this completely unique way that I was really drawn to it.
There's something interesting about pianos as well, because when I was growing up, it wasn't exactly my gran. I called her gran. It was a relative. But she had an upright piano in her house, and yeah, when we were at the house, that would be what kept me amused. And the amazing thing about pianos and just keyboards in general is, even if you're not trained in any way, given enough time to start piecing together a couple of pairs of keys, you can make something musical. It's different from a violin or a trumpet or something like that, in that sense, where there's a technique that you have to really master to do it right. With piano, you could just sort of make something quite pretty with just a little bit of time. It didn't take tuition, and that was a great way to draw people into it, wasn't it? It's like it really, you felt like a musician sitting at a piano, whereas if you sat with a violin, you felt like a Philistine.
Well, that's why the piano is one of the best instruments to learn, if not the best instrument to learn harmony on, because you have a visualization of the music and a scale in front of you. Mm-hmm. It's like a ladder, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the same house with the same plans and the same rules, and the same light under the moonlight. It tells us when to lose. It's the same night, cast the same trace from the same view.
So you studied at St Mary's Music School in Edinburgh?
Yeah.
That right? Like, how did you end up there? Were you spotted at school, or was it a family thing wanting to encourage your talent?
So when I was 15, before Creative Scotland, it was called the Arts Council. Scottish Arts Council did this amazing thing where they subsidised places at St Mary's, which meant that you could enter, you had to audition. So I had to perform the cello and perform the piano, and then speak about why I loved music and that kind of thing. And if you were successful in your audition, then they would means test your place, which meant that there was a great deal of subsidisation for kids that were committed enough to music to take it really seriously and take it to the next level. And I was really, really fortunate to get that place, because I could be in a string quartet, I was in a string ensemble, I was in a piano trio, I was in an orchestra. They had a little multi-track recorder as well, like a little 8-track, and I didn't have that at home. So like all these things I couldn't really find in Elgin, I suddenly had access to in this school. And it was a boarding school, but every so often they let like a pub in. And I remember when I arrived there, I was like, can you put it on the radiator? And they were like, the what? And I was like, the radiator. I'm like, oh, the radiator. It's kind of like your last episode, actually, of like speaking on the automated services. I was like, excuse me, may I have a cup of tea? And actually it changed my voice sort of forever. So that's,
I suppose it does, yeah.
Fact.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's code shifting.
Yeah, exactly.
Code shifting. I have a question that was like kind of occurred to me there, obviously, because you started picking up how to play instruments at a very young age. When did you start writing music? Because that's different from when starting to play music, right?
I didn't think, what you were saying earlier about if you have a piano and you can bash at it for a while and eventually you'll come up with something nice. I feel like everyone can do that, especially kids, because we don't have as many like boundaries and our minds like totally open. As soon as we have a new toy, we start to create with it when we're young. But the concept of actually writing a song or trying to write a piece didn't really happen until I started listening to songs at like 12, 13, because it was like that mindset of connecting with those more, I suppose, mature kind of lyrics like James Taylor or Led Zeppelin and things like that.
Won't you look down upon me, Jesus? You gotta help me make a stand. You just got to see me through another day.
And thinking, oh, that's interesting that you could write. So it wasn't until that moment, probably 12 or 13, that I thought songwriting could be an interesting way of putting my emotions into a place. And then writing music felt like a good way to support that.
I think the interesting thing about the keyboard, it was a keyboard for me that I got at my house. That was the first instrument I had. It was, I didn't have the patience to learn how to play, and I did learn sheet music a bit, but again, just super impatient. But for me, it was writing first. It was like starting writing and just like, oh, these keys sound good together, and learning without any of the background knowledge. And later in life, I really regret that, because then you get into bands with people that are just so proficient at the technical side of it, the theory side of it, and you can't keep up.
Yeah. But I think, that's one of the things I found quite interesting about my musical development, is I'm now learning how to play keys at 37 years old, because I've always wanted to do it. Played guitar since I was 16. I got guitar lessons in like my early 20s, so I learned a bit of theory doing that, but I kind of felt my way. I only ever wanted to be a singer. I play guitar as an extension of that, do you know what I mean? But I do wish I'd learned formally something when I was younger, because it feels as though that would be much more valuable, you know, just having a feel as though you've got a wider toolkit to use, you know what I mean, than just learn other people's songs and try to feel your way through it. But there's merit to that as well.
There is merit, because a lot of the people that learn to write first seem like they develop more unconventional approaches to songwriting. Yes,
absolutely. Because when you're like free of technique and you've not been sort of institutionalized into technical practice, you've actually got more of your like cerebral, do you know what I mean? Like that creative space that you can, like, the plane is clearer to have ideas. So even though that's like my background and my story, actually I went through a period in my late teens of slightly resenting the fact that I was classically trained and actually rejecting it. When I was 18, I went to France and I didn't go to music college, or I didn't go to university, because I was so stifled by all of these rules and all the structure, and like totally overwhelmed by just harmony itself and how complex it got, that I needed something like a lot more simple. And that's when I started writing good songs. So I think that what you're saying is like true. Like, it's good to, if you feel like you want to catch up, then it's good to like always be challenging yourself. But at the same time, there's so much wealth and value in like, not doing not doing the same thing as everyone else. And
yeah, there must be a Goldilocks point, because the thing is, if you write the music in a band and then you're trying to articulate it to players, it helps to have the vocabulary to be able to say that. But then people do unwittingly slip into tropes if they've learned to by the book. You know, you see it in their stuff as well. It can be quite predictable. But
my brother's a bit like that. He went to uni and did music, and he's got a theory head, and he's like, you've heard him, he's a fucking great player, man, but he does fall into those conventional traps, which is a bit difficult when you don't really listen to conventional music. You know what I mean?
I'm going to tell him you said that.
I'll tell him if you want.
So there's just a couple of things I wanted to pick up on that you'd mentioned there, Siobhan. So first of all, like, your access to that school in Edinburgh was really helped by the funding bodies at the time, and the support that was there, which I think is quite different now. So
I'm Creative Scotland funded, and that's the new version of the Arts Council.
And there absolutely is funding there, but I think the approach, certainly the budget of the funding is quite different these days from those days as well. But the approach, the way they use that funding is also quite different. I don't actually know what's in place at the moment for things like that. I don't know if there's equivalent to that. I usually see funding from the kind of like bespoke applications for this X project, Y project, and they're done on a case by case basis and things like that. But the funding bodies have changed quite a bit, and it's really nice to hear that everything you've done, it may have happened in some other way, but everything you've done the way it is unfolded in part because of this support and this access that was provided to you by that funding body. And it does go to show the good that funding bodies can do when they support people that are serious about what they're doing. You mentioned France, and France is like a big part of your musical story early on. You moved there at 18 and you spent, was it 5 years in France? And did you? Now I kind of get this confused because it was a label called My Major Company.
Yeah.
Was it in any way a major or a subsidiary? I mean, it was a sizable record label, wasn't it?
It was actually so weird. They were a French record label, but they had this English name, My Major Company. And it was kind of cool in Paris, at least, to like call things in an English name. Like if you had a bar, you'd be like the Sex on the Beach. Like, even if it was cheesy, it sort of worked. Yeah. And they were a subsidiary of Sony, if I remember correctly, as a publisher. Mm-hmm. And the actual label, I think, stood independently on its own merit under the name My Major Company. And the guy who ran it was the son of Jean-Jacques Goldman, who is the lyric writer for Celine Dion.
Oh, really?
Nice.
And she's like such a big deal in
France.
There's a nexus, aye.
That was his kind of story, is like my dad's in the music industry and then he got into it, and then it was the first crowd-funded label.
Oh.
It's still around, but the model that they used for us at the start, you asked if it was a major, like they called themselves a major, yes, and their biggest artist was called Grégoire, and he had a song that was like a real kind of, I was going to say a headbanger, but I'm not sure if I was banging my head on a wall.
A bopper?
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it was just one of those like pop tunes that everyone loved. It was a summer anthem.
Yeah. Honestly, it's ringing such a bell that I suspect that it's maybe our friend Audrey that's maybe played it to me, because she's a big French music aficionado.
Maybe, yeah, like there's so much good French music and there's just so much to take from France that doesn't reach Britain.
We've spoken that many times, like there isn't the same reciprocity. Like British music, it just has so much more clout than French, and as a result, certainly in the French underground, some of the French bands have to be so much better than their British equivalent just to be noticed. And you know, for us touring in France, it's a humbling experience sometimes, the quality of the support acts and stuff like that. It's so high.
Yeah.
What was it like for you over there? I mean, you put out an album, which I think, is it called Songs or is it called Chansons? Was it Songs in English as well?
It was called Songs.
And imagine the photo frame bars in my bedroom window. The wind letting the nasty creepy crawlies and all the wee French beasties that like to bite me. Window, why don't you?
And I mean, you're bilingual, at least bilingual. Are you multilingual? I don't know.
I'd say I'm fluent. Bilingual's like really, really perfect. Fluent's like you sound weird, but you get by everywhere.
Got that accent, but the only people that from that country can tell you've got an accent, but we couldn't.
Yeah, maybe get away with it.
And so you still do quite a lot of stuff in French. What was your experience like there with that bigger company, with that distribution, with just in general?
So my introduction to the music industry was this label and this record deal. I got 2,000 euros as an advance.
How did they spot you? Like, how did
on MySpace.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Nice.
I had a MySpace account.
Living the dream, you and the Arctic Monkeys.
Well, the thing is, to sign up, so even at that time, you could still get an advance for like £100,000, and that wasn't really a big deal. That doesn't happen as much anymore. You still hear of a couple of bands a year getting deals, but 15 years ago it was much more common, and obviously 10 years before that it was just like a lot of people could get a deal easily. And so me being quite sort of shy and not really speaking French that well, when I was like 19 years old, signed a contract for €2,000. It was the most money I'd ever seen, and it felt like Christmas. And of course, I realised afterwards that that was an obscenely low amount of an advance to get, you know. And I signed the contract, so I willingly walked into the deal. But that being my first record label experience, I didn't have much to compare it to, and I didn't have any friends at the age of 19 who I could ask, you know, who'd been in the same position. So it's easy to look back and see what you've learned and what you would have changed and how you could act differently. But now I release my own music because I think I learned so much from being signed to a major that it helped me pave my own way today. So if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be an indie artist. But can you tell me, like, what's your understanding of independent artists? Because I know that it's changed over the years a little bit.
An interpretation of an indie artist. I mean, I think it's probably changed. I mean, in the past, I would have assumed it would be one that wasn't either part of a major group or a subsidiary of a major group. But I guess that could extend down to sort of fairly independent labels that had distro. I think a truly indie label for me would be, like self-owned, self-managed, and then either self-distributed or you literally buy a distribution deal rather than it falling under some umbrella. But I mean, even that has changed so much as the formats and stuff have changed. What's your interpretation of it?
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking to myself, like, is an independent artist an unsigned one, an unpublished one? And you've got this kind of illusion of choice sometimes, as you say, where you can have you can have artists that are presented as independent, but they belong to subsidiaries of massive record labels. And that can appeal to an aesthetic and a kind of genre almost. Would you say indie's a genre?
I think.
Well, indie is definitely a genre, like indie rock, I guess.
But it doesn't mean independent, does it? Because a lot of indie bands are not independent.
That's just where it originated, though.
I know.
Yeah.
I think one thing you were saying, Siobhan, about like not being in a label or stuff there are. So does that mean artists that get big on TikTok and get like millions of streams and are making some money from it, a reasonable amount of money, not enough, probably not enough to live on, given what we just learned end of last year about the streaming revenue on Spotify and how much you need to make minimum wage. But are they indie artists? I mean, technically they are independent, but I mean,
they are. They're just big indie artists.
Yeah, like you might not get in streaming revenue living wage, but the branding deals that come with the associated profiles are like so huge that you would need a team to manage that in itself.
Yeah, so if you get a team involved, are you still independent?
Yeah,
there's a lot of things people talk about when bands are selling out is when they get a fucking manager, right? It's a good example. Some record labels, I won't say who, think that that's the case. You know what I mean? So a lot of punks think that. But that's obviously nonsense, right? Because sometimes you just need somebody to manage your shit, no matter what size you are, I guess. But if you get marketing, if you get PR involved, you're still independent. But it's
I think we've got a good example to hand. Jerry Cinnamon.
The realization coming over your mind that it should be a canter. If you could just find the answer. You know it could be a canter.
Jerry Cinnamon was a very big independent artist. I mean, he was selling out huge shows, but he technically was still independent. He'd built his own team. He had to hire loads of people to help manage his affairs, but nothing he did was at the behest of some like corporation that handed him down a check to be like, here you go. I mean, that's independent doesn't necessarily mean minuscule. I think it's to do with the means and the methods.
Yeah, so how I define myself as an indie artist is how compromised I am. Okay. So when you're signed to a major, there's a lot of like decisions that get made in a group or as a team, and you have a voice in that setting and you make the music, but at the end of the day the rights are owned depending on, there's a couple of different factors, but generally speaking those decisions can be made by other people, or it's a part of your contract to make more compromises to reach a little bit closer to what other people want. And that can include your fan base as well. And whether that's right or wrong, I think depends on the individual I couldn't say if that's right or wrong, but what I could say is what makes me happy is like not feeling that compromise, and that's what I would describe as like being free to create. And in that sense, I've got actual independence.
Yeah, well, that's a really good segue, because after that experience, you came back to Scotland and basically somewhat hit a reset button on your career, and at least your approach to it. You started recording and releasing these things in very kind of bespoke, handmade packaging, building from the ground up, and that eventually led to Suffering Fools Records. But before we get there, when you came back, did you start doing that just as a matter of necessity, or did you come back and say, I consciously want to try this approach to making music now?
Well, it was interesting because when I first came back to Scotland after 5 years in France, I was actually still under contract.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd released the album, and there weren't any, like, nobody was asking me, like, you have to write more songs, or there were no demands being made on me. I just kind of quietly was like, I'm going to do my own thing now. And if no one asks, and if I don't ask, and it was kind of this, like, I can't really write new songs because I don't think I'm supposed to release anything while the last album's still in having its term. And they owned everything I'd written from the age of like 13 to 24.
That's fucking insane, man.
In perpetuity, by the way.
That's comprehensive as well.
Very insane.
It's totally insane. It's amazing that that's legal.
Yeah.
And I think that somebody just won a court case for that in the UK last year, but I can't remember for the life of me what their name was. The band, they've like delegitimized the in perpetuity sort of clause for bands in the UK, but it only happened last year. Did you see that?
I hadn't.
It does ring a vague bell. It kind of brings us back to the July 13th thing as well, like that band, like they were on a major, but they never got the record out.
Yeah, the major just spiked the album because it didn't fit with their new release schedule, and that was many years' work. Just that's it. It's locked in a vault.
I guess some of them would have been tied to having to not be able to do stuff until X period of time passes, so they can then release music again.
Yeah, without kind of like putting blame on that label, because that was a deal that I did sign. I just made sure that I didn't break any rules or find myself in any kind of bother. So I avoided releasing songs or like being. So actually, I was kind of like my own pirate radio station where I would like.
It's another thing I should have had in the list at the start.
I sort of like was secretly writing and like being creative, and I needed that space and time to just be alone and just have my voice in a room kind of thing. And I wrote the song Dear God, but I didn't release it.
Dear God, all I wanted was a job. I did require runners down here, and I ran out of money. Bad things can start to happen.
Yeah, for quite a while.
Well, yeah, until all of that was over. Actually, I just remembered I'd forgotten this for years, but I got out of that contract officially because I applied for The Voice, the BBC Voice. Because Ali McRae, the like other half of David Weaver, used to be a radio presenter.
The guy with David Weaver tattooed on him.
Really? He was like approaching people at open mic nights and saying, I'm the scout for the BBC The Voice and it's a TV show. And I said, oh, there's no way I'm doing that. I've just been through a crowdfunder thing with a major, and it was exhausting, and now I'm looking to do something smaller. And he said, no, it's going to be totally different. It'll be more like, remember Fame Academy?
Yeah.
You can write your own songs. And I thought, well, I'm kind of at a dead end in a sense with like what I'm going to do next. I didn't really feel like I knew at the time. So I just went for it. It was a free trip to London. And I auditioned, and it wasn't really like Fame Academy at all. It was like really pop, kind of like pretty cheesy. No offense to like anyone who's been on it.
The reputable artists that have since come from The Voice.
Like, I don't know. I've not like followed it up, but I still enjoyed it and had a good day. It was like an audition practice, I suppose. But the BBC lawyer was like, you can't be signed if you do The Voice. And I was like, well, can you check with my last label if mine's like definitely, no loose ends. And so I got that confirmation email that confirmed like there's no longer any ties. So that was kind of a weird way of getting confirmation.
An interesting way to get it, yeah.
That's cool though.
And was the first thing you released Glorified Demons? Was that 2015?
Yeah.
So I sold everything I own. I have nothing left to lose. I'm going to a place where nobody knows my face.
And how did that feel going into releasing in that way? I mean, you were involved heavily in the recording as well. Must have been a really different experience.
It felt like when you have demos and you decide on the arrangement that you want, my experience in the music industry before that point had been that a producer or the label will come and take them and change them and kind of like take it as meat and then funnel it into a sausage. And this like product will be born. And you don't know if you'll still feel attached to the product at the end once it's come out the other side of like the factory process. And that's why it's called Glorified Demons, because it's like demos. And it's sort of like my first step in searching for like a more real sound. And I'm making inverted commas with my fingers because what does that mean? Like to be real, but like, I hate the word authentic, but it was my like way to just get closer to myself, I guess, and start stepping away
to get
from
closer
like,
to that sausage.
Step away from like the sausage that everybody else wants, and just kind of forge my own way forward. So the sound changed and became a lot more natural and a lot more like when I'm singing live, because that's what I always wanted and what I still want is as close a performance as possible to real life and not too produced.
Well, actually, we'll mention that because in some of your later records, you did start including live performances on the records, and I think that was definitely a good decision. How do you reflect on that Glorified Demons record now? I mean, the tracks themselves, do any of them stand out to you? Do you still feel particularly fondly regarding it? I mean, for me, reading you. I always particularly liked that song. I thought that was the first time in your material that I'd heard you take those risks of being like, of stuff being very fragile and very exposed that you went to do much, much more often later on in your career. There was a track in it called All Dressed Up that became a bit like your Smells Like Teen Spirit, I think, for a while, where it was the one that people knew and you would hear people asking you to play it. And I think you re-recorded it for a later record as well, didn't you? A different version. And that was a really nice song, but Reading You had like a vulnerability and a real like willingness to take a chance on it that I think made it jump out of that record quite a bit, and it's aged very well as well.
The interesting thing is, if you actually heard the demos of that really early album that I did songs, then you'd probably say a similar thing, because actually the demos I made for it sound like that. It's just that afterwards, when the song was produced by an amazing producer and the label put a lot of work into it, it came out sounding like someone else. And so this kind of style of leaving things how they are, what is too much, or is that not just enough? People talk about the demo syndrome, Like when you get so attached to the demo that you don't want it to change. But the actual truth is like very often, if you don't overly Photoshop something, if you don't become obsessed with editing and polishing, and like things don't have to be perfect.
Yeah. I mean, it's reflected in the name of the record as well, I guess. It's quite self-aware. I mean, after that, Say It's True, did that come out the same year? Was that 2015 or was that later?
Oh, that was... I've got no idea.
I mean, it can't have been...
It was after Glorified Demons. It was before it, but I don't know what the year was.
Yeah, like 15 or 16 maybe. And it seemed like it kind of represented a slightly folkier turn in what you were doing at the time.
Put on that white gown, show them what you've been made of. Your mother taught you to be tough. If you've waited all your life to prove her right.
You were sharing a label with like Eddie Reader and Lau and stuff like that at the time as well, wasn't it? Reveal Records.
Yeah, well, there's... Do you guys know Celtic Connections?
Yeah.
It's just this, for anyone listening who might not know, it's like an amazing folk fusion festival.
Yeah, folk, jazz, trad,
Celtic.
It's like they've put connections because they get international bands to come over and collaborate with Scottish bands, or they get like a folk band to collaborate with a rock band and that kind of thing. And they'll put up and coming performers on as support acts to really give you a chance.
It happens all over Glasgow, doesn't it? It's like it's in multi-venue, multi-weeks. They have like after show parties that feature shows as well. Yeah. In fact, you're about to do one in, what is it, 3 weeks' time?
Yeah, on the 26th.
The 26th of January at the
Macintosh Church in Glasgow.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to do it as well. Like the acoustics in there are amazing.
I appreciate the plug, but I wasn't actually bringing it up for that. It kind of did change the way that I thought about music, because I got more like influenced by what was around me in Scotland, and I was exposed to a lot more folk music at that time.
Yeah.
And I ended up playing Celtic Connections. If I wasn't playing, I would go along like every year.
Yeah, I do remember that, like, because not that you were sort of pigeonholed in like singer-songwriter, but I think it was much more down the line singer-songwriter playing in like indie venues, and then there was this turn where you were working with a lot more kind of folky musicians and that scene and that kind of management, those kind of bookers and things like that, and it's kind of reflected in the music on that record. I mean, some of those songs I know are still songs that appear in your sets. I mean, Believe in Everything was one that you played quite a bit, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
And in this moment we take a step back and wonder where it might have come from. We are both children again. We believe in
and Desperate Thing as well was on that, which I think is probably my favourite one on it.
Without you I'm a desperate thing. Too bad, too bad. We never speak at all anymore.
Yeah.
Terrible Woman, Great Eye.
Terrible Woman's probably the one that I still play because it got picked up for a television show later, like 2 years ago, on Back to Life.
To make you cry. The anger wells up in your eyes. I am the man I used to despise. I am a terrible woman.
Have you seen it?
I haven't.
It's like a thriller, what is it? It's like a psycho thriller drama sort, but it's not that scary. It's just like, I don't know how to describe it without giving the plot away.
How did you hook that up? Did someone approach you?
Yeah, it was someone who'd seen me play live in London once in the audience and remembered the song and was like, it's kind of about a terrible woman, the TV show and the song. And you don't know, is she terrible, is she not? And then I come in and I'm like, am I a terrible woman? So he was probably like, oh, that's the song that fits this woman.
How did it feel being more involved in that scene, in the Celtic Connections kind of like scene?
To be honest, like the actual, talking about technique earlier, like the technique that you need to be a folk musician, I don't think is something I personally possess. When I was surrounded by that culture, like in my country, I felt like, how have I not learnt any of this earlier? Why wasn't I like getting more involved with folk music when I was a kid? And just this like massive appreciation of how fast they play and like this kind of seemingly never-ending library of songs that everyone knows and like remembers, and like, so I kind of felt like, oh, I wish I had that. And I just was so drawn to it and just really grateful to be immersed in it.
See, when you say technique, what do you actually mean by that?
Kind of like how fast they can play. So I play the cello, but I can't play really fast, like folky, like
pizzicato,
fiddly, like
sort of stuff. Yeah.
I don't want to do an impression because it sounds disrespectful. Yeah, like super fast playing, or even like just this kind of like, it almost feels like an innate sense of rhythm, like it's not in a straight 4/4, and it's also not written down in music, so every like 4 bars I just miss a beat. It's like,
why not?
1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2. You know what the vibe?
Yeah.
And everyone just knows. And I'm sitting there with my fingers like, where's the third?
I'm going to get it this time. I swear to God, I'm going to get it this time.
So the record that we feature on the Record Club is called There Are No Saints, and that was the next big release. Am I right in saying that?
Thank you for featuring it.
That's okay.
A great record.
I love that album. Yeah, 2018, I think that was.
2017.
2017. Obviously, the track There Are No Saints on that was a really interesting divergence in the sense that you were messing about with different production and different vocal techniques and doing some kind of non-linear songwriting at that point. There's also a number of tracks on that I think are a lot more linear. Things like Whatever Helps, which had that kind of dream pop fuzziness to it. You had Make You Mine. I think the lyrics in Make You Mine are really nice. That kind of, you did that really storytelling approach.
There you were, standing at the bar, with old thrills, unpaid bills, clinging like dust to your dinner suit. You said you needed a change of scene. I said, why don't you dance with me?
Little window into somebody's life and the romantic sort of take around it, and all your kind of name dropping the ABC as well.
Which sadly burned down.
Sadly combusted.
You know, how many times do we mention the ABC
Quite
burning down? Yeah.
That's fair to say.
I think I mentioned it last week that it burned itself down after that Finch reunion tour.
When they couldn't be bothered to be there. I don't want to play any songs anymore.
Siobhan, you don't have to stifle your laughter, it's okay.
Just leave me alone to die in peace.
I mean, other standouts in that though, Disaster and Grace, which I think is just one of your best works.
The fog that clouds the space between disaster and grace, those sounds you think you know, a broken piece.
and the track Dear God that you mentioned, which you seem to have written quite a while before it. A really, really interesting track based not just on how pretty the song is, but the subject matter.
You were right in saying my Prince Charming would come, but you did fail to mention that he would stop loving me when I told him that I couldn't have his baby.
It's dark, but I mean, go into it a little bit. People are going to hear it anyway, so.
Some people have already heard it.
Even though it's called Dear God, it's not as religious as you would think. It's more like a bit nihilistic, like a rejection of everything. It's like when you're so depressed that this is going to sound so pretentious.
That's okay. That's what we're here for. Mm-hmm.
But like, on one hand, if you're like just so unbelievably depressed, like you've reduced your experience of life to like its minimal state just so you can get through the day and survive, kind of thing. And then on the other hand, you've got like a need to survive, so you're suddenly fueled with like the bigger picture in life seems more clear and obvious, and you've got these like yin and yang kind of like juxtaposition of like opposites that you're going through, and like something, it leaves room in the middle for like what's next. Mm-hmm. I think depression does that to us. It forces us in this space of like that momentum of like just putting the foot one step forward and dragging yourself from a bad place into like a new one. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's basically what Dear God is. It's just this like kind of horrible to me reaching out of like, I'm here and I'm gonna make sound and I'm gonna. Sorry, this is so heavy.
No, it's
not. You both look really sad.
This is
we always look really sad.
Yeah.
McTavish, do something funny. No, that's the most honest answer I could give. Is like,
but it's no coincidence that song's really endured. I mean, that's a song when I'm mentioning you in conversations musically. It's like you have to hear this song because it's melancholy and as dark as some of the subject matter may be, it's the way you've tackled it. I think it's a pretty special moment. I know you're too bashful to like acknowledge that, okay? But
it's just funny, like thinking that you'd say like you'd introduce me like from that song, and I'm like,
check it, this singer.
What a job!
She's so miserable. It's amazing. So when exactly did you start Suffering Fools Records? Because it was somewhere around this period, wasn't it? Because the next record, A Departure, came out on it.
Burn it after you read it. It doesn't distinguish between flame and passion, before life and after the last train ride. Thoughts worth keeping are your alibi. Don't look back at the
Yeah, like, so even when you're signed to independent labels, and I'm not talking about one in particular, just generally what's industry standard and what we call normal practice is that whoever owns the master of your track, and we saw this with like Taylor Swift's
she's got hers back, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, like that's really normal that someone else typically will own like all of your master rights if they release the song or if that's what's been agreed. It's harder to get a licensing deal, which is when you have the product, you've paid for the master and you want to retain all of those rights, and essentially the label comes in as to service its release. It's much harder to get one of those if you're at a level that's not like you're already famous. And then so basically, because that was the case, which I'm not saying is like the fault of a particular person, but as you can imagine, for an artist, it's like these songs being played or being used is sustaining a community, or like it's creating profit somewhere. Mm-hmm. But how do I sustain an artist career when I'm sourcing the funding, like for example Creative Scotland funding, which they very generously like funded the recording of There Are No Saints and my new songs as well. So you source the income and you get the funding together, which is great that exists. And then you work and you produce like this massive project. It can take years to like write the songs, record them and mix all that stuff for then someone else to own them. Like maybe not forever, but even for like 10 years or something. Yeah. And to put it in the scale of things, like if your song gets played on the television or the radio, the person who owns the master rights, first of all, normally they own 100%. It's like usually one person or like one company that has the master. They get about 7 times as much as if you are the person who owns the songwriter copyright. And that's something that's weirdly not as known as like it should be. It depends on the format of the royalties. Like I think it would be different for Spotify and things because that keeps changing as well. But like roughly speaking, it's something like 7 or 8 times as much. So it's a big difference. There's like a kind of weird austerity.
Yeah.
That's like in the music industry where you've invested a lot more into something and essentially it's quite easy for people to kind of come in and cash in.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not accusing anyone of doing that in my career because I'd probably get in trouble. But I'm not. I'm just saying like that is actually normal. So I've decided to like study what all of that means to as much as possible because it's hard and I'm not a lawyer and I don't understand everything.
Yeah, and it's not always fun.
It's not fun and a lot of the conversations can be uncomfortable. And actually you can be seen as a bit kind of like litigious, which doesn't actually go well.
A difficult woman.
Yeah. It doesn't fit the like, I'm a fairy.
Yeah, there's definitely a trope waiting to be unleashed there.
But it's a bit of a shame as well because like that's actually what I would prefer to be like. It's just like exist in the countryside with my dog, write songs and just focus all my time on making music so that I didn't have to be studying about rights all day every day, but it's just simply too much to give away 100%.
Yeah. In order for the former to be sustainable, you have to do the latter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have to, but everyone's got their different like take on every artist's so different. There aren't that many who do the same thing as
there
me.
aren't. And
I was going to say that.
That's why I was saying it's something that's so commonly associated with, punk bands and things like that, scenes like Discord and stuff, where a disdain for the major labels and those mechanics led to people sort of becoming autonomous in that way, albeit often at quite a small scale. Not always, but often at quite a small scale.
Yeah.
It's just really, really interesting to me to see that same DIY spirit, that same sense of like, as I say, you're not pointing any angry fingers, but you're like, this has to change. This isn't really balanced, and I can do something about it. And it was fascinating to see you embark on that path, given the path that you started on, and I understand that the path that you started on really played a large part in influencing that decision. But that is really, really interesting. And you're now fully self-releasing everything?
More or less, yeah. And that has its limitations as well. But, you're saying like sometimes that achieves like a smaller level. Like basically you've got a smaller reach if you're doing everything on your own, but you can't buy happiness.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation that we've had, never on the podcast, but about the podcast. And it's that, I work in marketing as well, so it's better to have a really engaged, smaller audience than it is to have a massive audience that are a bit ambivalent. You know what I mean? That is worth its weight in gold, really. And any artist will bite off anybody's hand for that. Obviously, they'd like to have a lot more, but
you know what else is worth its weight in gold?
What? Gold.
Take some of that.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, that would also be quite nice. Yeah.
Well, I've taken things to the extreme now. So I've got the record label, which is essentially its purpose is to self-administrate my releases. And then I've got a Patreon account like you guys. So I've got a community of like, it fluctuates, but it's about 100. And I think that's like the golden number. I heard that once at one of these music industry conferences, like exactly what you're saying. If you can have a solid fan base who's really engaged, emotionally as well. So it's not about the money. It's like about the attachment that they have to building the product with you at your side, actually being a part of it, contributing to some of the decisions that you make. I can share my new songs in a safe space. I can express myself without being judged. I can take criticism on there as well, and like feedback from people and some really good ideas. So that's like, I wasn't planning on doing that. That happened because of the lockdown.
Yeah.
And since that happened, I've really felt supported by my community in a way that I didn't feel supported by the music industry.
It's a really fascinating approach to an alternative funding model as well, because, and this is a subject that we wanted to kind of look into, we've actually mentioned this on a completely different show just in passing, talking about how you had gone in, diversified into this approach, which was to have a subscription model where fans of your music could subscribe and get like original content and exclusive content by subscribing to you, and at the same time generating a regular income for you that enabled you to keep doing what you're doing, as well as having like other releases out there in the ether. I mean, that is a podcast model applied to a sort of hybrid of podcasting and music, and it's really innovative. It's a really, really interesting take in it, especially in an era where obviously well-documented devaluation of music as a product, as a sellable product. And even, you know, I mean, a lot of indie labels are releasing at a loss, or at the very best at a break even. You know what I mean? It's a passion project. You're managing to do that, but you're managing to do it in a slightly more business savvy way that enables a sustainability to it. Because unfortunately, with a lot of these indie labels and all these indie bands, truly indie bands and DIY bands, there's a term limit to that.
You start brushing up against the harsh reality of economics of having to fucking exist.
It's like life stuff. People get ill, people have children, people have to have some crisis in their family, or a relationship breaks up and they can't afford to keep, and that suddenly that wafer thin margin is their undoing. And it, whilst I'm not saying for a minute you're driving around the borders in a golden Land Rover,
I've got a 15-year-old beat up Twingo. I bought it second hand.
Twingo sounds delicious. Doesn't sound like a car. But it is just a really, really interesting approach to it, and it's something that's, I guess, is more easily facilitated because you are so autonomous, because you are self-managed.
Yeah, I think that with being autonomous, and this is like just about life in general, there comes a lot of strength in like creativity, but there's a bit of vulnerability as well. And so I think it's more than about the money and that kind of thing. It's like about actual support. And you humanize your fans in the same way that your fans humanize you. And I think that when we're presented on social media as the best example, because it's got quite toxic in some ways.
I've not been on in a while. Has it gone downhill?
Have you been banned? Have you been unbanned recently, Chris?
I just found out that my cousin is Elon Musk's bodyguard.
No!
Fuck off, man.
I literally found that out this morning. I've never met the guy, but one of my family members showed me a photo, and it's Elon Musk at the World Cup, and he's his bodyguard.
That's outrageous, man.
So
you need to take action.
I'm taking bids. Anyway, sorry.
I was going to say, do you know that Patreon was begun by a guy who was in a band and was looking to do exactly what you do now, you know?
Yeah.
I just realised that. I just remembered that there when you were talking. Like I remember when he first launched the website, and it was in the news, like on music websites, and I was like, that's never going to take off. And it has, you know, it really has. We're still around because of it, and obviously you're doing really well out of it. I see you've been doing Twitch recently as well. So I was just kind of wondering, so how are fans reacting to the content you're putting out there for them, you know?
So Twitch is like my newest endeavour, and I'm figuring it out, to be honest. Like there's so many things. It's highly interactive. Have you been on it to see a gig?
Yeah.
When you're watching someone sing, and music's quite new to it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's like...
Yeah, because it's a gaming platform really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's mostly gaming and like weird stuff about like stock exchange, sort of like TV presenting, I guess.
Like Bitcoin and all that kind of thing.
Bitcoin and chat zones. Like, so music's exciting to be a part of, like that kind of genre of like Twitch, because it is building up. So I'm on the Discord channel to get like tips from other artists, and almost everyone's completely unsigned in DIY, which is interesting. when I went on it, the impression I got was like, geeks are welcome here. I follow nerdy singer Kat, and she just does like Disney songs and has purple hair and like a nice hat.
Yeah.
And she's just really happy, and it's not like, I'm so cool, I'm in a cool band. She's like, what song is it? Yeah. I'm like, this is what I've always wanted.
Yeah, you see them in like like snippets of it on TikTok when you've got like drummers who just like do a silly costume and play like a song, any song somebody asks and stuff like that, and it feels dead wholesome a lot of the time, I think.
It's moderated so that it stays wholesome. So like if words come up that like bad keywords or whatever, then you can block people a bit more easily on Twitch. It's the same with Patreon, is like they've got really good safeguarding policies.
Oh shit.
So
this explains a lack of revenue.
Yeah.
I've just made your like podcast episode the most boring and she's brought up safeguarding policies. But it is important because the online world's like full of peril.
It is a midden.
So I was going to ask, with you having a subscription, do you feel pressure for having to deliver for your fans like regularly?
I should feel more pressure, I think. I think I've been lucky.
It must put you in a mindset of being constantly productive as well.
Well, it's a job, isn't it?
Yeah. It feels like, I think I was putting myself under an obscene amount of pressure before to release stuff on social media and always have content and then be like driving that forward, especially the kind of Spotify influenced culture of like thinking about music as food and content that's their Spotify's like advice that they give to artists, is that you have to constantly produce more songs that can be consumed. Mm-hmm. And so while I was like rejecting that, obviously, because I don't really think it suits any kind of creativity, if you're exposed to that, whatever you're exposed to, the context of your life is always going to seep into your songs, like you were saying about the folky elements and Say It's True. Mm-hmm. And so actually on Patreon, like there is a bit of a like obligation to appreciate people, but that's so much easier actually than the alternatives, which is just kind of like, sometimes on social media you can just be kind of singing into the void a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the pressure is real on that, you know. I think it's difficult to maintain a presence on social media generally, I think, especially as you get older and life gets in the way and you've got other things you need to do. And so
you need a drama, a crisis.
You need to become the main character.
It's a thirsty business, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in 2019 you did Plastic Grave. seven tracks, like mini album. I don't know what counts as an album these days. It's up in the air, isn't it?
I think I called it a mini album.
Now, I mentioned earlier on, and you mentioned as well, about live performance capture and that. So this one featured Behind the Curtain, live from Montreal. Well, in that song in particular, the live recording gives it a very, very ghostly, ethereal quality. But as somebody that I've seen you play live a number of times, and that's really, I think, your forte.
Yeah, I didn't really ask myself the question. I kind of just really liked the sound of it, and thought that it represented the song well. So,
do you have a studio version of that song?
No.
Oh, there you go. That's a definitive version, isn't it? And then Survivre in 2021 starts with a live track, Unload the Gun, which is a really, really gorgeous recording of that as well.
Recorded by Luigi Pasquini.
The body as a battleground where no one gets to wear the crown. Unload the gun, don't go shooting where you don't know. She held the bullet and stopped, cameras focused.
That album was released during COVID. There's a number of like beautifully arranged and kind of maybe more traditional song structures on it, but you also began to explore some fairly experimental territory in that one. The 10th track in it, God Is in the Mirror. The 12th track in it, Yesterday, I think are, you could call them slightly avant-garde, and it's a really interesting side of you to bring to the fore. There's also a lot of interesting stuff about the recording process behind that. Can you unpack that a wee bit? 'Cause it's actually, when you see the album on, for example, Bandcamp, where it's available, it doesn't actually tell you where it was recorded or what happened with it, so maybe you could explain that.
Well, the tracks that you mentioned, so Yesterday and God Is in the Mirror, I would describe them as film music-y.
Mm-hmm.
I know what you mean, it's like a bit avant-garde-y. I started to study composition.
Hence the Masters.
And a big element of that was film music and documentary scoring or video game music and like an introduction. And I was listening to a lot of soundscapey, like anything from like Ennio Morricone to like the soundtrack from Last of Us.
Mm-hmm.
Forgot the composer. The thing about video game music that I love, or film music, is like the genres can be crossed so easily. And like when I think about myself and the albums that I've made, or like the music that I like, from playing the bass as a kid, doing System of a Down songs, to like going like more folky or more jazzy or more classical or like more, I just kind of see genres this exciting thing that can be explored, but also it's like borders. Like there shouldn't be borders and boundaries between genres, because actually it can be really limiting as well.
Yeah, it should be more fluid. Yeah.
And when you've got a video game, you can have like so many different genres, and I find that really exciting. So that album was made while I was at uni, kind of like on the side doing the masters.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it came out sounding like a bit cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was writing the songs, I was imagining the picture more of like the narrative in the lyrics. Did that answer the question?
But behind the scene, like in terms of where you recorded some of those other songs, you took a wee adventure as well, didn't you?
Oh yeah, so I recorded some strings, live strings, which I'd always wanted to do, but couldn't afford it basically. So Creative Scotland paid for that, which was very good of them. And then I could have some players from the Scottish Chamber Orchestra and like Scotland's classical scene. And then I also had some songs engineered by Steve Albini in America. I was on tour in America supporting Suzanne Vega, and also doing my first little like handful of headline shows just before the pandemic. And so I kind of tied in recording with him for a few days as well.
It was Electrical Audio in Chicago, yeah?
Yeah. And then kind of wrapped things up in London, which got the process got a bit elongated for like actually finishing mixing and stuff because of the pandemic mostly.
Yeah.
And so it's just that time, like everyone's got a pandemic story of like, where were you when the pandemic happened? Like I was just about to go to South by Southwest, just back from recording with Steve Albini, and kind of like just that summer before just being on my first headline shows in the US. And so the album was left a little bit hanging in thin air, and then it gently got finished. But it kind of existed in this sort of weird time,
In terms of that record itself, I mean, there's a really standout track on that that's also on Plastic Grave called Your Moon Has Come.
This empty room is a museum of you. yours was made of
which I just think is, again, one of your best pieces of work. Is that the exact same mix, or was there any remixing done between the EP and the album version?
That was just solo voice and piano. And I think you can hear a little bit of electric audio in it as well. And you hear the sound of the piano, the pedals. But I'm getting it mixed up with another one. There's Survivre has
Survivre.
Like, you are rolling.
Yeah, that's right. It's got Steve at the start, and it's just that, and that one's incredibly stripped back. That's just got those little arpeggios.
Don't say that you're leaving. I know what that means. Don't let the leaves fall from the tree. Don't say where you're going. I know where that is. Just like I knew you'd be.
Yeah, and really fragile, and that's going back way back to reading you, for example. Like, it's that journey into being as exposed as you can be with just a guitar and voice, and allowing the space in the song and the resonance and the imperfections and stuff, and leaving them all in there. That's a really stark song. It's beautiful, but it's really stark. Your Moon Has Come is lusher, piano led and very wistful. It's got a really beautiful middle eight as well.
Under the moon dive, it tells us when to look. It's the same night, cast the same trails from the same view.
Striking song. I love that song.
Yeah. Also, like Francesca Woodman, was that one of the ones you did at Electrical Audio?
Oh yeah, that was written by Don Patterson, who is a poet in Scotland.
Ghost face, not because I turn my head, but
Oh, you know what I mean?
Well, you like poetry and you hate lyrics, remember that?
That's true.
Bluesier song, but it has those really rich string arrangements that you were talking about that you were able to work on thanks to all those different Scottish players.
I talk a lot of pish sometimes, don't I?
Absolutely. But luckily you're paid somewhat to do it.
So does McTavish, it's okay. No, you didn't say that.
A model of good behaviour. But as you were saying though, the timing, coming back from the States from those shows, having recorded with Steve Albini, which just always gets tongues wagging anyway, having this record it's a spectacular record. There is that danger of losing momentum or being discouraged, as a lot of people were during the pandemic. I do think it's really fascinating though that, going back to what you were saying about video games and scoring, so you did the documentary score for Myanmar.
Yeah,
that's right. The Wish for the Waves, which is on the BBC iPlayer if anybody's curious.
Don't mention the BBC, mate.
I get Siobhan started. I think now you're an assistant writer for, was it Takeshi Furukawa at Noise Refinery?
Yes.
Is that right? Which is like it's a label based in LA, isn't it? It does like trailers, films, TV, video games and stuff like that. And as a result, I believe, it's on your website, so I'm assuming we're okay to talk about it, that you're the singing voice for the game Planet of Lana, which is on Xbox in 2023.
I haven't. So what can you tell us more about that game? I'm a gamer, so I'm intrigued.
Planet of Lana is a girl who gets lost in this world, like her family's gone and everything. There's a kind of like apocalyptic style like disaster, and it's a like discovery puzzle game. Okay. You've got this little McTavish like creature that's like between a cat and a dog that kind of runs behind you, but you like give it commands and stuff like that.
That's cool. To
like, it can run up on a ledge and like throw you down a rope, and you get really attached to it. Like, it'll go quiet and you'll be like, oh, where the fuck? It's called Mooey.
Yeah.
Where's Mooey? It's really, really cute. And it's all hand painted all of the scenes.
That's cool.
I don't know how that works. I've never been in a animation studio. Like they hand paint them and then they put them in the computer. Or I sound like my mum with a mobile phone.
Yeah, exactly. I wish we had more technical lingo for that. But
yeah. Some magic computer.
Put them in the computer.
Yeah. And then an elf appears. You have summoned me. What is the task?
Nobody really knows.
That's Planet of Lana, a Swedish
indie game. Yeah.
Indie game.
You've also, I think, on Hogmanay. So this is just less than a week ago from recording, or literally a week ago.
It's Hogmanay.
Yeah.
What is Hogmanay?
Hogmanay is New Year's Eve in Scotland.
Yeah.
You released it. Quand la vie fait mal.
Oui.
Yeah. Your new single.
L'ami qui te tient, la main dans la main, les yeux vers le cœur, quand viendra ton heure.
Which is available on.
It means when life hurts.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
In fact, to be fair, it was generally that kind of Christmas and New Year this year.
Kind of was.
It was a stinker. But yeah, so I mean, again, you managed to circumvent what could have been a real blow to momentum by diversifying. And what I find remarkable is that you're diversifying from the standpoint of being an autonomous artist, that you're the one that put yourself through those courses. I understand, I mean, I know this because we've spoken about it, that you then went and studied sound engineering to have a better grasp of live engineering, to be able to more clearly articulate and ensure that you were getting what you wanted from live performance, because in those situations when you don't have the vocabulary or you feel a little bit at the mercy of whoever you're working with, and that's remarkable in itself. It shows how determined you were to take on the responsibility of all these different facets of your career. So it's that creative control thing. There is a healthy amount of control there that I completely relate to, because I'm very similar when it comes to live sound, wanting to know what they're doing, because there's no point putting all the work in behind the scenes if then the last person before it hits the audience just doesn't get it and completely distorts the thing you're doing. There's a thoroughness to the process there. So from that potential real hurdle of COVID, you've opened up all these other avenues, not just for sustaining yourself, but outlets as well, creative outlets. Like you said, you're thinking much more cinematically as a result of working on scores, as a result of working on games. You've broadened just the palette of stuff you're writing so immensely. That's really fascinating, how you could do that under your own steam during such a difficult time.
It's not all my own steam. I would definitely credit the Patreon fan space for me being able to basically survive in the pandemic and be able to get, in music, every time you start something, it's like very kind of the gig economy and like freelance culture. Like you're not really paid at the beginning. Like every new path is like a couple of months of building up skills or contacts or connections or equipment. And so definitely having the Patreon and that support there meant that I was able to explore stuff during the pandemic that I actually couldn't before. Mm-hmm. Or, for example, I wouldn't have thought of putting live shows online until we all had to suddenly. In a panic, it was like, you can only play on the internet. And so that would never have happened if, the pandemic gave me that chance, I guess. Like, finding someone like Steve Albini to record with and sort of meet someone who's okay with you just being yourself in a room was almost therapeutic. Have you ever been to counselling?
Yeah.
And basically you talk and the person listens. That's what they're supposed to do.
Is that a podcast?
It's a chance to reflect back on who you are and just be safe in a room. All recording should be like that.
Yeah.
You should perform and everyone in the room with you should not tell you that it's amazing or big you up, nothing like that. Just allow it to be without being changed.
Yeah.
And for someone to give you the opportunity to just listen and just say, yeah, that's okay, is really healing after years of trying to get closer to the path of so if you think about that happened just before lockdown And then the fan space gave me a community where I could start sharing music and not feel judged and truly not feel compromised. I think that's what opened up like a new confidence to expand like my own, all those things I'd always wanted to do, just suddenly now they're easier.
Empowered by it, basically.
Yeah, I think so.
So I take it your experience working with Steve was really positive then?
Oh yeah, it was quite fast. It was only a few days. He was very straightforward.
I'd love to record with him, man, but I'm just not fucking good enough. It'd be a disaster.
No, don't say that.
Totally would
be. we had a question as part of the Christmas special about Steve Albini, and part of my, I fielded a lot of it, and part of my response to it was what a good reputation he has, especially amongst the women that he's worked with.
Oh yeah, like nothing. You mean like, oh, he's not creepy or anything like that?
Yeah, it's just he's the sense of respect and sort of not being patronised. His approach to it is so. His reputation in that respect is so good. Kind
of more like a uni lecturer in terms of like style of communication.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before about him.
This is and if you ask him a question, because I'm kind of endlessly curious, like kind of master of nothing, but like I want to know like everything. I'm not going to like become a sound engineer like Steve Albini, but like I want to know like what does this do? What is it? And he was very patient and explained everything that you asked, and he enjoyed talking about his own craft. And it was kind of like, you know, the painter Renoir would talk about painting as like a daily craft, like a hands-on trade that you sit and you chip away at every day. It's like this humbling, he's kind of a humble person, just in a weird overalls.
Yeah. Do you have to wear them when you go there? Like, do you get given one? No.
It's like Ghostbusters.
A bit like Ghostbusters.
I was going to ask, it's interesting you mentioned the knowledge, that kind of knowledge exchange thing, which you clearly likes to do.
Yeah.
One of the tiers on your Patreon is you do lessons or songwriting lessons. Is that something you also aspire to do, like that knowledge exchange of passing on techniques and stuff like that to anybody that wants to learn?
Yeah, I think so, because everything that you learn, and there's different ways to like retain the information, and one of the best ways is to teach it to someone else. Like if you want to remember something forever, or for something that you're passionate about to become like embedded in your musical identity, one of the best ways to kind of crystallize that learning and that practice is to perform it or teach other people, like to externalize that somehow. So
it consolidates it immensely, doesn't it?
It consolidates it, and then you learn so much from teaching. So there's this like endless cycle. It makes my brain explode. It's like never ending. But I feel like we're doing that right now.
And it's one of the things I enjoy about my work outside of the pod is like teaching people the things that I do and showing them and mentoring people. I'm really into that, you know. So like I totally understand that desire to want to do that.
Can you mentor me on making podcasts?
If you really want to, yeah.
Can you mentor yourself in making podcasts?
I'll start there, right, and then we'll move on.
So we're getting close to the end here, but as if you didn't get up to enough in the last 3 years, you're also one of the key people behind a group called POWA, P-O-W-A. Can you explain a wee bit of that? Because, you know, we've talked a lot about the music, but knowing you for some time now, I also associate you with a lot of activism in music, in the sense that, you know, for example, campaigning for better representation of female artists on festival bills and these kind of causes. Like, can you give us a little bit of that side of yourself and POWA in particular? Maybe explain what it is for starters.
Yeah, it's called Protection of Women in the Arts, and it's a collective, it's a grassroots group of women in music in Scotland who, it's like a support network and a place where women can learn how to record or produce or mix. That was my dog's ears, by the way, that sound. It was like the flapping of his ears, like he shakes his head. So there is a very high level of sexual assault. Trigger warning. I was meant to give the trigger warning before I said that, but I didn't.
Listening to our podcast, a trigger warning.
It's widely reported in the media. It's surveyed by Durham University, like at music festivals. in the UK, like every year. Even some of the local ones in Glasgow, a large one in Glasgow that I won't name.
That one, yeah.
Like, kind of like exist in the music industry without any regulation or policy or standardized codes of conduct, which is unusual because almost every
sector has
trade
that.
sector has that. Apart from music, I don't know about other ones. Even like, I don't know, I'm thinking of like the tattoo industry has a lot of regulation and health and safety, and journalism has its own kind of union and code of conduct that you can break. In music, there's not a code of conduct that you could particularly break that would result in any consequences. So what you have is a lack of safeguarding of women, and that
because just to interject, because what you're talking about is a structural approach, not just people losing their temper on the internet. You're talking about an actual protective set standard that can be adhered to. And
like I definitely think that it's okay to lose your temper on the internet because everybody heals from trauma or whatever in a different way. But I get what you're saying, like that's not what I'm sort of doing, in the sense of like, I've just got that kind of approach to life. Like if something sucks, then I just kind of think, how can I fix this in a small way? Or how can I shine a small light on this that might lead to it being fixed? And kind of try to think about the bigger picture of like, oh, there's policy missing from festivals like in the country. And why wouldn't, you've got policies that are anti-theft and you've got policies that are anti-drugs.
Yeah.
But you don't have policies that are anti-sexual harassment, even though hundreds of thousands of women. It's like just this weird, it's like this weird shame that our industry chooses to perpetuate. But no one really wants it, do they? Like musicians, fans, even the organisers don't want it. The police don't want it, but no one takes the step forward to like actually change it. So I'm
that was left to you, yeah.
No, it's not me that's like personally fixing it.
No.
But part of the work that I try and get involved in is like, creating positive change more. There's already a lot of opportunities for everyone, but there's not as many for women all the time. So it's like, how do you balance things out?
Everyone wants to just ignore it and hope that it goes away somehow at some point.
Yeah.
And that's clearly never worked. It's not going to work.
But I can sympathise because that's what I'm like with my dog. He's the sex pest at the park, even though he was spayed. Like,
well, he's currently in Luigi's room, so hopefully
he's back. He's back. Looking happy with himself.
Talking about you.
I guess it's a very broad question, so you'll pardon me, but over the piece, as a woman in the music industry, especially now that you're, doing stuff under your own steam, has your experience been broadly positive? Has it improved? Has it got worse? Are you really aware, or perhaps you're just more aware of it as you've gotten older?
Well, the TUC announced in the first year of the pandemic, that's the Trade Union Congress, that female freelancers in the arts would lose out financially on a disproportionate level to male freelancers. And I think that figure itself kind of displays this huge disconnect of like, you could link that to the experience that women have in the sense that it's statistically reported that there are huge gaps and losses that have been made. So in relation to my own career, although I'm happy with where I'm at and really safe and comfortable and like really happy with everything I've set up for myself, and that everyone's who's involved in that is really cool and like on board with that, and I feel like that's a huge privilege because it's not always been like that. But then I'm aware that we have just had 3 of the most difficult years for 2.5, 3 yet?
Yeah, 3 now, yeah.
Who knows?
For the music industry, maybe in 100, like since it began. Yeah. And so although I've managed to kind of survive, like I felt like I was in Fallout 3, like at the beginning, like how do I find the solution to this puzzle? Where are the missing pieces? And like that's all very well for me, like spectrumy weirdo, like on my computer in lockdown, just like 24/7, like must find the answer. But
try to kill the ghouls as well.
Anyone who rings the doorbell, please don't come in. But yeah, it's not, it doesn't mean that like I don't feel in a physical sense, like kind of like how badly things have gone overall.
Yeah.
It makes me sad to see venues close or to see jobs getting lost. And it makes me question like, how come some other countries like did things in a very different way, and like Britain chose to do things in this way? And so I've always got like questions, even though I'm doing well, what could be done that's better? Do you have the answer?
As I said, an activist, do I have the answer? I do have the answer, but I'm just keeping it to myself because it's fun to watch the rest of the world struggle.
As for it, I keep the cure for cancer in my back pocket, but you know.
It's like Wild Stallions. I've got all the answers in this album I'm waiting to write. Siobhan, it's been so nice having you in. Just to recap again, Siobhan is part of the Unsung podcast record club. If you're a digital subscriber, you may well already have her record, or you could become a digital subscriber and get a record, or even better, you could just go to our Bandcamp or our website, SiobhanWilson.com.
Yeah, Siobhan/Wilson dash
hyphen Wilson.com, and get her music.
Can I just say as well, McTavish has an Instagram profile.
Oh.
At McTavish_the_familiar.
I'm pretty sure a couple of these photos of him larking about while we were talking are going to make it onto there as well.
You can tag him.
Yeah. And Siobhan is again playing as part of Celtic Connections on the 26th of January. If you're in Glasgow or near Glasgow, or even remotely near Glasgow, I would highly recommend you investigate our show at the Macintosh Church, which is just in Maryhill to the west of the city centre. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. I actually saw Blank Mass playing in there.
I was there.
Yeah, that was astonishing. So I'm sure, Siobhan, you've got to play your most reverberatory, ethereal, spooky numbers in that room. It's going to be fantastic.
Can I ask a favour?
Sure.
Can I let my Patreon hear this podcast?
Absolutely.
Can I
of course
share
you
it
can.
on mine as well?
Sure you can. Yeah. Absolutely. So thank you very much. Thank you, McTavish.
Thank you.
You're not going to make a wee bark. He's like too well behaved. I thought we'd at least get one sound bite out of him. But
did you hear that? You're a good boy.
Any dogs outside he can shout to.
There was some earlier on.
Yeah, we had to close the curtains because he was getting a wee bit too frisky. But okay, thank you again. Travel safe. Good luck with the show. I'll be there.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And Mark, we are going to come roaring back in next week, I believe. Hopefully, all going according to plan, because Vicky's a bit poorly, but all going according to plan. We are going to take on Queens of the Stone Age, which will be interesting. a lot of trigger warnings.
Yeah, for my sanity, if nothing else.
Yeah, well, especially for the last two albums. But yeah, okay, folks. Thanks very much. Thanks, Siobhan. Thank you,
Siobhan.
See you later.
Bye.